It was a busy evening at a well-known restaurant, filled with the hum of conversation and the clatter of plates and cutlery. The air was filled with the rich aroma of freshly cooked meals, and the atmosphere was lively, with customers chatting and laughing. In the middle of this, a woman entered, walking with an air of confidence that almost seemed like she expected the world to bow down before her. She was in a rush, visibly impatient, as she approached the host who guided her to a table. She didn't look around to notice the other people there. She was focused solely on herself. As soon as she sat down, she began glancing at her watch, tapping it in annoyance as though the seconds were stretching on forever. She looked up and called over the waitress, who was already busy attending to other tables. The young waitress, still learning the ropes of the job, walked over with a polite smile, ready to assist. The woman's eyes narrowed as she surveyed the waitress, who was clearly doing her best to keep up with the high demands of the busy evening. "I've been waiting forever! Can you hurry up and get my order?" she snapped. The words were sharp and full of frustration, and the waitress, caught off guard, nodded quickly and apologized. She went to the kitchen to place the order, but the woman's scowl didn't fade. When the waitress returned with the drinks, the woman's patience had run even thinner. "This is wrong!" she exclaimed, pointing at the drink in front of her. The waitress, confused, double-checked the order. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll fix that right away," she said, trying to stay calm despite the pressure building in her chest. But the woman didn't stop there. She began loudly criticizing the waitress, belittling her in front of the entire restaurant. "You're so incompetent," she said. "I'm paying for this service, and you can't even do something as simple as bring me the right drink." Her voice echoed through the room, causing heads to turn. The waitress stood there, her face reddening in embarrassment, unable to find the right words to defend herself. She had worked so hard to get this job and had always prided herself on offering the best service, but here she was, being humiliated in front of so many people. The room grew quiet, and for a moment it felt as though time stood still. The young waitress simply nodded, trying her best not to let the tears well up in her eyes. But inside, she was crushed. Her self-esteem felt shattered, and all she could think was, "I'm just trying to do my job." The tension in the air was palpable, and the other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one said anything, but they could all feel the unfairness of the situation. The waitress, her hands trembling, hurried to the kitchen to try and regain her composure. As she passed by the staff, she could feel their eyes on her, but no one said anything. She was embarrassed, her heart heavy with the sting of the customer's harsh words. She walked through the back door of the kitchen and took a moment to breathe deeply. The bustling sounds of the kitchen, chefs chopping vegetables, the sizzling of food, and the clanging of pans, seemed distant in her ears. In that moment, she felt completely alone. She placed the drink order with the bartender, forcing herself to stay calm and collected, even though inside she felt like she might break. "It's just a mistake," she whispered to herself. "It's just a mistake." But the words didn't seem to make the hurt go away. Her mind raced, replaying the scene in her head. She had never been treated like this before. She had worked so hard to be good at her job, but now it felt like all her efforts were worthless. Why did she have to be the one to take the brunt of someone else's bad day? A few minutes later, she returned to the table, drink in hand. The woman looked at her with a cold, judgmental stare, as if she were waiting for her to fail again. "Here, you go," the waitress said quietly, placing the drink down in front of the woman. But before she could walk away, the woman snapped, "Finally! About time!" The words were sharp, cutting through the air. The waitress didn't reply. She simply nodded and turned to walk away, the weight of the situation pulling her shoulders down. She wished she could disappear into the walls, not have to face the woman's cold eyes, or the judging gazes of the other patrons who were witnessing the scene unfold. But she had no choice but to keep moving, to keep going. It was what she had always been taught to do. No matter how tough things got, never stop trying. Never let them see you fall apart. As she passed by the other tables, she could hear some quiet murmurs, A couple of people glanced at her with sympathy, but no one stepped in to say anything. They were all too afraid of making things worse, afraid of standing up to someone like that. But as she headed back to the kitchen, a small part of her was relieved. At least the worst part was over. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she knew that, somehow, she had to find a way to keep moving forward. As the waitress made her way back to the kitchen, she felt a sense of relief, but it was only temporary. The harsh words from the customer still echoed in her mind. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had been working at the restaurant for several months now, and although it wasn't the most glamorous job, it paid the bills. But this experience, it was different. It felt like a punch to her confidence. Behind the counter, the kitchen was buzzing with activity, and the staff was moving quickly, preparing orders. But everything seemed to be happening in slow motion for her. The weight of the moment was still on her shoulders, and she could barely focus on the tasks at hand. As she leaned against the counter for a moment, trying to calm herself, she heard a voice. "Hey, are you all right?" It was one of the regular customers, a man who had been coming to the restaurant for years. He was a business owner, known for his kind nature and straightforward approach. He had seen the scene unfold from his seat in the dining area and had noticed how the woman treated the waitress. The man, a bit older but with a kind face, had been quietly observing the situation. He wasn't the type to ignore something when he saw someone being mistreated. Walking up to the counter, he placed his hand on the waitress's shoulder gently. "I saw what happened out there," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That woman, she had no right to treat you like that." The waitress looked up, surprised. I don't know what happened. I tried my best." Her voice trailed off, the emotion in her words clear. "You did," he said, interrupting her softly. "People like her, they take out their frustrations on others, and it's not right. But don't let her make you doubt yourself." His eyes were sincere, and there was something about his words that made her feel a little lighter. "You're doing your job, and you're doing it well. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words were a lifeline, something she wasn't expecting. She had been so focused on the negativity that she hadn't even considered that someone might stand up for her. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to her than she could express. For the first time in what felt like hours, she could feel the tension slowly easing from her shoulders. The man didn't stop there. He walked over to the table where the rude customer was sitting and, in his usual calm manner, addressed the situation. The waitress, still standing in the kitchen, could see the conversation happening from a distance. He didn't raise his voice, but he made it clear that there was no excuse for the way the customer had behaved. The woman, caught off guard, tried to defend herself, but her words came out weak. Other customers, who had witnessed the exchange, shifted in their seats, some glancing at each other with expressions of silent support for the man's actions. It was a powerful moment, a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right doesn't require a loud voice, just the courage to speak up. The waitress stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling a little more hopeful. Maybe not all. People were like the woman who had humiliated her. Some, like this regular customer, were willing to step in and make a difference. It was the first time that evening that she could feel a spark of hope. Hope that things would get better, even if just a little bit at a time. The conversation between the man and the rude customer continued, and from where the waitress stood, she could hear the exchange. At first, she couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone of the man's voice was firm and unyielding. It wasn't loud, but it held the weight of someone who knew they were standing up for what was right. The woman, visibly taken aback by his calm demeanor, tried to argue, but it quickly became clear that she was losing the battle. "Listen, no one deserves to be treated like that," the man said, his voice steady and composed. The other customers, once silent, began to murmur among themselves, nodding in agreement. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable situation was slowly being turned around by one person who refused to let the injustice slide. The woman, who had been so confident moments before, now seemed unsure of herself. She tried to defend her behavior, claiming she had every right to be upset, but her words lacked conviction. The man didn't back down. You're a paying customer, but that doesn't give you the right to belittle someone else, especially not in front of other people. Everyone here is working hard, just like you are. Treat others with respect. For the first time, the woman seemed to realize that she had crossed a line. Her posture slumped slightly, and she glanced around the room, realizing that people were watching her, judging her actions. Her face flushed red, and she stammered, I didn't mean to make a scene. But it was clear that her words were only an attempt to save face. The waitress, still in the kitchen, felt a weight lift off her chest. She had been too afraid to speak up for herself earlier, but here was someone else doing it for her, someone with the courage to call out bad behavior when it was happening. She watched from a distance, her heart beating a little faster as the woman slowly began to gather her things, realizing that she was not going to win this one. As she stood up to leave, she muttered an apology, but it sounded hollow, almost forced. She grabbed her coat, leaving behind her half-eaten meal and a few bills on the table. The other customers looked on, some with expressions of relief, others with looks of quiet satisfaction. The man turned and walked back toward the kitchen where he met the waitress's eyes. You handled yourself well, he said with a smile, his words simple but meaningful. Don't let people like her get to you. You're better than that. The waitress couldn't believe it. In the midst of all the tension, someone had stepped in and made things right. She felt a sense of gratitude that she had never expected, and for the first time in hours, she was able to breathe a little easier. It wasn't just about the rude customer leaving. It was about the support, the kindness that had been extended to her when she needed it most. Her heart still ached from the earlier humiliation, but now there was something different in her chest. A small spark of hope, kindled by one person who believed in fairness. Maybe the world wasn't as unforgiving as it sometimes seemed. Maybe, just maybe, there were people who would stand up for what was right. And for the first time that night, she felt a little less alone. The minutes that followed were filled with an unexpected calm. The tension in the restaurant slowly began to fade, leaving behind an air of quiet relief. The waitress stood behind the counter, still trying to process what had just happened. She could still feel the sting of the humiliation, but now it seemed more bearable, as though the weight had been lifted just a little. The man's words echoed in her mind. Don't let people like her get to you. She held on to that, like a lifeline. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The rude customer had paid her bill and left in a hurry, her exit almost unnoticed compared to the scene she had caused when she arrived. The waitress couldn't help but feel a sense of justice, seeing her go without a word of protest. It wasn't just that she was gone. It was the fact that she had been called out for her bad behavior in front of everyone. The idea that someone had stood up for her, for the first time that evening, felt like a small victory. At one point, the restaurant manager approached her. He had witnessed everything, but had been too far away to step in at the time. He leaned against the counter with a kind expression on his face, giving her a moment to catch her breath. I know it wasn't easy, he said softly, but you did great. You handled yourself better than most people would have. The waitress nodded, a small smile forming on her face. It wasn't a big gesture, but it felt real. She had done her best in a difficult situation, and now she was being recognized for it. It meant more to her than the manager probably realized. She had always tried to do her best at work, even on the toughest days, but it was rare for someone to notice the effort she put in behind the scenes. Later in the evening, as the restaurant began to quiet down, the man who had stepped in came over to the counter. He hadn't left yet, and he approached the waitress with a warm smile. Hey, he said casually. I hope you're doing okay now. His presence was comforting, and the waitress felt her nerves begin to settle. I'm all right, she replied, her voice softer now. Thank you for what you did earlier. I didn't know how to handle it. "No need to thank me," he said with a shrug. "I just said what needed to be said. No one deserves to be treated like that." He paused for a moment, then added, "I know this job can be tough, but you've got something special. Don't let one bad experience change how you feel about it." His words stuck with her more than she expected. She had always known that customer service wasn't easy, but this encounter had shaken her more than most. Now, with his encouragement, she felt a little stronger, a little more confident in herself. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about not letting others' behavior define her. As the restaurant began to empty out, the waitress started cleaning up her station. She felt grateful for the unexpected kindness that had been shown to her. It had turned what could have been an even worse night into something much better. She knew that the day would end and things would return to normal, but something inside her had changed. She had learned that sometimes all it takes is one person to stand up for you to remind you of your own worth. The next day, the waitress came into work with a strange mixture of nerves and curiosity. She wasn't sure what to expect after everything that had happened the night before. She had been replaying the events in her mind, wondering if the discomfort would linger. The feeling of being humiliated still stung, but it was starting to fade. She had learned that sometimes the best way to move forward was to just take one step at a time, and today she was determined to face the day head-on. As soon as she walked into the restaurant, she noticed the man who had stepped in the night before. He was sitting at the same table where he had been when the confrontation occurred. He waved at her when he saw her enter, and she couldn't help but smile a little. It was a quiet smile, but it was sincere. He had made such a difference to her the night before, and she felt a sense of gratitude that she hadn't been able to express properly. As the day went on, she found herself growing more comfortable, as though the weight of the previous evening was slowly being lifted from her shoulders. But she wasn't expecting what happened next. Around lunchtime, the man walked over to her and asked if she could take a moment to speak with him. She nodded, a bit surprised, but happy to chat with someone who had been so kind. He sat down across from her with a warm smile and looked at her directly. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "I know things were a bit tense last night, but I just want you to know that you're doing an amazing job. It's not easy being on the receiving end of bad behavior, especially in a job like this." She blushed slightly, unsure of what to say. I didn't really know how to handle it. I didn't want to make it worse." "You didn't make it worse," he reassured her. "You stayed calm, and you handled it with more grace than I could have expected. That's a gift. Not everyone can do that. A lot of people would have broken down or snapped back, but you didn't. You should be proud of yourself." His words were so kind, and they hit her in a way that she didn't expect. No one had ever really told her she was doing a good job, in the way he had. She had always been focused on just getting through the day, trying to meet everyone's expectations. But now, someone was telling her that her effort mattered. It felt like a breath of fresh air. The man continued, "I also wanted to say that you don't have to put up with anyone treating you badly. You're a human being, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Don't let the actions of others define your worth." The waitress felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from relief. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. She had been carrying around the weight of other people's negativity, but now she understood that it wasn't her responsibility to carry that burden alone. "Thank you," she whispered, feeling more grateful than she could express. He smiled again, giving her a nod before standing up. "Take care of yourself, and remember, you've got this." As he left the restaurant, the waitress stood there for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had expected to just get through the day, but now she felt stronger. For the first time, she believed that she could face the challenges of her job with a renewed sense of confidence. The man had given her something priceless. The belief that she mattered, that she deserved kindness, and that she was capable of handling whatever came her way. The days following that conversation felt different for the waitress. When she walked into work each morning, there was a quiet confidence in her step that hadn't been there before. The sting of the previous evening still lingered in the back of her mind, but it was no longer the overwhelming weight it had once been. Now, she felt like she could handle whatever challenges the day might bring. She started to believe that not every day would be like the one where she had been humiliated in front of everyone. Her co-workers began to notice the change too. She wasn't as tense, and she smiled more often. She felt lighter. Whenever a difficult situation arose, whether it was a demanding customer or a busy rush of orders, she found herself handling it with more patience and grace. She still made mistakes, but they didn't shake her as much. She had learned that it was okay to not be perfect, and that kindness, both toward others and herself, could make all the difference. The support she had received from the man had given her the strength she didn't know she had. Every time she felt doubt creeping in, she remembered his words. "You're doing an amazing job." They had stuck with her, not because he was the first person to say them, but because they were said at a time when she needed them the most. They reminded her that her worth wasn't tied to how others treated her, but in how she carried herself and treated others. One afternoon, as she was clearing a table, a customer approached her with a smile. "Hey, I just wanted to say that I've been coming here for a while, and I've noticed how hard you work. You're always so calm, even when it's really busy." The waitress was taken aback. The compliment felt so genuine, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," she said, smiling shyly. The customer smiled back. "You make the experience here feel better. Keep up the great work." It was a small moment, but it felt huge. She realized that the kindness she had received, the words of encouragement, had helped her transform into someone who was proud of what she did. It wasn't just about serving food and drinks. It was about making people feel seen, heard, and respected. The impact of kindness was far-reaching, and she was starting to see how it could change the atmosphere of a place, even one as simple as a restaurant. Weeks later, the woman who had been rude that night didn't cross the waitress's mind as much. It was clear that her behavior had been a reflection of her own frustration, not of the waitress's abilities. The waitress had found peace with what had happened. She no longer carried the burden of that encounter, and instead, she carried the lessons that came with it. In the end, she learned that a bad day didn't have to define who she was. She had the power to change how she responded, and she had found strength in the support of others. And more importantly, she had learned that kindness, both giving it and receiving it, was a force that could turn even the most difficult moments into something meaningful.